Thank you. Well, the question comes, of course, how on earth do you follow that presentation? Because that is absolutely stunning. We have, what we're dealing with here, I think, is a new understanding of who and what we are. For decades now, we have focused on a society which is crumbling. We're building chemicals into our society which are making us sick. Our food processing industry is killing us. Chronic disease at the gut health level is rampant. We're living longer, perhaps, but we're also not living better. And so the question is, how do you actually exist in a world which is determined to turn away from nature and towards that which is unhealthy? It's a mindset, a process which is normalized. So when people like myself go into Parliament, we are somehow abnormal. And when we first came into Parliament, they said, okay, well, it was a landslide, a Labour landslide, so we rocked up there, and most of the new ones were actually Labour members, and they were talking among themselves, chattering away like birds in a tree, and they'd turn to me and say, and which party are you from? I would say, legalise cannabis, Western Australia. And universally, they turned to one side, the eyes went this way and that way. Oh yes, cannabis, marijuana. You want to smoke cannabis in the streets. And I thought to myself, well, first of all, I've got 4 years to exist with complete idiots. And the next question was, with a massive Labour majority, how are we possibly going to make any difference at all? Because clearly they're uneducated and not prepared to listen. So, I was looking forward to 4 years of being totally ineffective. We had a mandate from a population for saying, yes, we want to legalise cannabis. 2 members in the upper house out of 36, which is pretty good. In the lower house in Western Australia, we've only got 2 Liberal members. It used to be a major party. We've got as many members in the upper house as they have in the lower house. But still, the question was, how do you actually make a difference? Well, we're leading on to the boring part of life. You elect a member of Parliament and we become establishment. And we have to do normal things in normal ways to legalise a plant which has been criminalised for far too long. And the first thing I had to do was establish, who am I? Am I a weed smoker? Well, I'm not a weed smoker at all, I'm a cannabis user. Am I a weed smoker, single issue, fly-by-night, in for a short term, and the real politicians can carry on with their job? We're a fly in the ointment. Or am I the future? So I get up there and I've got the huge advantage, I speak as a medical practitioner, and as one who has kept his job part-time as a medical practitioner. So I've got 2 jobs. One is working full-time as a politician, and it is a full-time job, and the other is keeping myself a hand in as a GP at the front line. The huge advantage for that was when I got up to speak in Parliament, and they told me McGowan has spent $300 million on more psychologists and psychiatrists. I can get up, look around over my glasses, and point out to the people, speaking as a frontline medical practitioner, I thank you for the $300 million, but none of it has reached the people who need it. There's a waste of money. Now, I'm not quite as cruel as that. I describe different things, but they need to actually pay attention. But I got up and I asked questions in Parliament. How, for example, how many people have you actually convicted of cannabis when driving? Well, we don't keep those details. Why not? So you're actually criminalising people driving with medical THC. You don't keep the numbers, you don't care about them, do you? You're just penalising them, you're getting more money for that. I'm not as cruel as that, and I can't be as polarising in Parliament. I have to be a politician. I have to actually speak as a politician, not as an angry doctor. And I am an angry doctor. I went into politics because I was angry, because you, politicians, are making life so difficult down there. You're disenfranchising, disempowering people, you're sidelining them, letting them rot, and blaming them when things go wrong and they take cannabis to settle the nerves. You don't bother when they're drunk on alcohol, but the cannabis is a problem for you, and indeed the other psychedelics. What planet are you living on? So I couldn't be that angry doctor. So I asked questions, because I'm a scientific doctor as well. What's the thinking behind this? Why would you want to do this? And I kept asking these questions, and finally, the Parliamentary Secretary for the Attorney General, a friend of mine, Matt Swinburne, says, "Brian, have you thought about a select committee?" Now, I didn't tell him we'd been planning this for the whole time. To make myself so unpopular by asking sensible questions that they want me to get off their backs, they'd sideline me by giving me a committee. Brilliant. So my Machiavellian plan number 1 succeeded. Now, the difficulty with a select committee is you can't actually speak about what you're talking about because it's still under the process of examination. 1.5 years it took to get this report out. 1.5 years. And it looks like every other bureaucratic paper coming from Parliament. But this is incredibly important, because what this is a committee run by specialists featuring politicians from a variety of parties. It's not just a government. Look, the majority of the members here were government members. They had no idea about cannabis whatsoever. We had one national party and myself as the chair. And so we started collecting information. This information is going to be on the parliamentary website forever. It will be always available. The information here is produced at a high standard, and it represents what the committee feels is important. Now, committees, you might look at politics in Parliament and say, that's where the work happens. No. The actual political work is in committees. And it's done in a bipartisan manner because you're working together. Because politicians, once you get out of the television and they're sitting in the bar, we're actually friends. And they're actually good people. They may be dipshits at times, but they're good, they mean well. And so you get on with them, you have a relationship. And so in the committees, you're working with parliamentary colleagues. They may be on the opposite side or have very different points of view, but they're still colleagues and we're friendly with them. And our task then is to find out what is the truth. And to do this, we first of all we were defined what are the terms. Now, the government defined the terms. Specifically, they did not want me to go into recreational cannabis. So they defined it very clearly, medicinal cannabis, the barriers too. And they added in hemp as well. Great. Now, the thing about this is that what they didn't know is that everything is cannabis adjacent. So they're a bit of the back foot there, but we got a report out which basically did what was possible. Now, to do this, we had to invite people in, people of different points of view. The three major ones, Fiona Patton pointed out yesterday. Well, first was Drug Free Australia, then there was another DeLonghi name, I think it was, and then the WA police, all opposed to cannabis. Now, the WA police weren't actually opposed to cannabis, they were opposed to driving when impaired. And that's a very sensible thing to be aware of. And they're simply following the law in WA, which states that when you drive with THC, you're driving with a prescribed illicit substance. Now, as a doctor, I thought prescribed illicit means I'm prescribing a drug which is illicit. Nonsense. This is legal language. It's been prescribed illicit by Parliament. It's been said this is an illicit substance. The fact that it is now permitted for medical use, they still haven't changed the law prescribed illicit. Now, the police have to go by what the government law states. So when they stop you driving with cannabis, the presence of cannabis is equivalent to being impaired, and it's a prescribed illicit drug, they have parliamentary authority to charge you. But think about that. When we are driving with a medically prescribed substance, and the government is saying, well, you can have it, but you can't drive with it because it's illicit, we have a conflict. It's wrong. And the police know this, the government now knows this. In fact, back in September 2021, before I was asked about the committee, one of the very famous members in the Upper House, Alana McTiernan, was scolding me in Parliament for suggesting that you don't have a medical defence for driving with THC. And I said, but this is the law. You can't be the right. I said, it's the law. This is what the law says. And she said, oh, I'll check that and I'll take that to the Parliament, to the Premier and Cabinet. So back in 2021, the Premier and the Cabinet already knew we have a problem. We've enshrined into law a lie. Now, if they had any sense at all, they would be crafting the laws to change that, but they were waiting until this report came out. Now, the report. We travelled extensively in Australia and also abroad to seek a variety of expert opinions, the growers, the users, the pharma companies, and also the scientists, especially in Germany and Israel. Fantastic research there. I mean, there's a summary here. There's a couple of things. Well, there's actually how many are our recommendations? Recommendations are 16 recommendations, 19 findings. Now, the government is obliged to give a report in 2 months about our report. They're obliged to report back. And we then, in due course, maybe in a year's time, will debate this in Parliament. But if the government has got any sense at all, there's some things which are so blindingly obvious that if they haven't crafted the laws yet, they must do that soon. One of those is going to be the driving with THC. Now let me say what Now we listened to a number of people, including the Department of Health, and it's fair to say that the Labour Party members of the committee were not impressed. There was a number of people who contributed. There was the mines and the mining and the petrol sector sent in a representative who said, yes, the FIFO workers, if THC is present, they're impaired, they're going to ban them. And there's a whole host of things that were wrong with that. Now bear in mind, the Labour Party members came from the union organisations. And they were thinking, hang on, you go on and you haven't got any impairment and you're being struck off, you're losing your job, you're losing your house because of something which is not present. You've tested for THC, but they're not impaired. And you let them on when they're sleep impaired, and they can cause death and damage. Okay, and you let them go on, but you ban these ones here, and you strike them off and cause them physical, mental, and emotional pain. And they tore that man apart. I had to sit back there just watch what they were doing. It was a joy to see how the Labour Party members who came on thinking cannabis is bad now began tearing apart people who shared that point of view. It was awesome. So education of the party members there was fantastic. So one of the findings not here that I have noticed is that the tone of cannabis in the chamber has changed. As they're talking to their friends, their party colleagues, they're now saying what we thought about cannabis is wrong. In fact, most of the Labour Party members have either used cannabis or support its decriminalisation or legalisation, but they don't dare say so. It's actually Labour Party policy, state party policy, to decriminalise cannabis, but the Premier is against it. And because the Premier is against it, and 2 or 3 of his major members, they don't dare speak out against it in case they don't get on the list for the next election. So that's really what we're dealing with. There's not actually truth, it's about the perception of truth and me keeping my place in the party. Anyway, the findings we got here. Where are we now? Cost benefits 24 months, driving. What was recommendation 4, was it? Just bear with me a moment. So many recommendations here. Here we are, driving laws. The recommendation is that the Western Australian Government amend the Road Traffic Act 1974 and Road Traffic Drug Driving Regulations 2007 to introduce a defence for patients using medicinal cannabis as prescribed who are not driving whilst impaired or under the influence of alcohol. Now, they based that on a couple of findings. The first one, and this is here a parliamentary committee, has found that the current driving laws in Western Australia detect the presence of the cannabinoid but do not calculate or assess the level of physical or cognitive impairment. That's a major statement. The inclusion as a prescribed illicit drug predates the legalisation of medicinal cannabis. What they're basically saying is the law is wrong. Another finding, road traffic legislation should now incorporate a defence to reflect the legality of medicinal cannabis as treating cannabis as any other drug which might impair your abilities. And the last finding here, current roadside drug testing for THC does not allow for an adequate assessment of the actual or likely risk a driver poses to themselves or others on the road. Now you'll note, this is particularly boring language. They've used this, and I like this, because the whole report is written in bureaucratic terms. It's not something you take to bed to keep you awake at night. This will send you to sleep in a heartbeat. And it's deliberately designed like that because this is not controversial. What we're putting out here is something so blindingly true in bland bureaucratic language that change must happen. The only question is when. So I can pretty much guarantee that we're going to have a defence against driving with THC in the system. And that is huge. Now you might then say, because I was speaking with people who saw this report first, they said, oh, it's a waste of time, you should legalise cannabis, this is all the nonsense, you've wasted your time. What I then say is, look, people think that politicians come in and it's all talk, 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 we do nothing. Get a salary, waste time, sit in your bum, and just screw the people of the state. Actually, we work very hard, and there is a way of doing things, and playing the game allows you to get wins. This is a win, because if we now begin to see this dam of prohibition, a small crack appearing in that dam, it's not going to be long. That crack is going to widen, that dam is going to crumble, and we are going to have legalisation of cannabis. It's not a question of if, it's when it happens. And this is one of the first. In fact, I am betting, I'm hoping, that we can get defence against driving with THC in Western Australia before the lucky buggers in Victoria can. They have a balance of power, but we have a balance of facts. And it's actually cross-party support. Everyone supports this report. We'll debate that in Parliament, but I'm looking forward very much to what comes before that. Now, if anyone does want to get this, it's available on the Parliament website in Western Australia under committees, past committees, and it's available to all. It will always be there. This will never vanish. One of the things that we discovered in our committee is that the Department of Health is unscientific, incorrect. We were limited in Western Australia because in other parts of the state, the nation, we can prescribe fairly high levels of THC, except in Western Australia. 30 milligrams total, or then get a specialist. And then who's that specialist? It's someone who's never prescribed cannabis in their lives is now the specialist, and I've got to ask that specialist, please, 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 may I give more THC? Well, that will probably change because the committee here has recognised that's crap. What they've said is, we would like the Department of Health to recognise that we should be giving at least a maximum of 100 milligrams of THC, if not more. That's the starting point, 100 milligrams. So free it up so I can, as a doctor, prescribe what the patient needs. Now, it's true that many patients will need small amounts of THC or maybe even none at all. The cannabinoid CBD itself, mind you, with the full spectrum, is probably going to be much more effective than the isolate and also cheaper. But if I need to give THC, for example, for PTSD, I'm going to want to increase that to the point where the patient is not suffering adverse effects and is having a good beneficial effect. Oh, by the way, the previous one, the psychedelics here, I'll be using psilocybin or MDMA, and that is hopefully coming on board. So we are actually looking here at a wellness in the population can be enhanced if the Department of Health abides by the decision the government should be taking. Now, there's 19 recommendations, 19 findings, 16 recommendations. Is the government going to accept them all? Probably not. But most of it is fairly bland, fairly sensible, and I can't see any reason. For example, within 24 months, the recommendation is that the Department of Health in Western Australia review the necessity of a daily THC prescribing limit. Is it necessary? Or do you leave it to the doctors to do the right thing? It's not necessary, but oh, THC is bad for you, it's going to kill you. Bullshit. Within 24 months, the Department of Health is to publish the results of that review and remove or increase the daily THC prescribing limit as appropriate. So this is actually fairly concrete. The Department of Health, when they came to us, and I know this because one of the staff walked out for a cigarette in the interval, and the Department of Health members were actually having a quick confab outside, and they were basically saying, oh shit, they've cottoned on to the fact our science is not scientific, and they will have to make a few changes. They'd known this already, but they thought if no one questions us, we'll just carry on. Okay? And they've been caught. And they realize, and as a practicing doctor asking questions, I'm not going to stop. So they know full well this is actually going to carry on. In fact, I deal with them when I prescribe and I need approval from them for certain things. I'm actually writing about, I'm happy to take this to Parliament if you find it has a problem. Yes. So it's really quite useful being a doctor who's working as well as being a politician. Other findings here relates to how we function as a state within Australia, because each state has got its own particular laws. And for example, did you know that a doctor in Queensland can prescribe for a patient in Western Australia, prescribe a script with much more THC than I can, have it sent across the border, and you've got no problem taking it. But they can't send it to a pharmacy in WA to dispense because it's against WA regulations. I, however, can attend to a patient in Queensland, send them a script for that same high level of THC and have it dispensed in Queensland. No problems at all. Isn't it strange? So all of a sudden now, we've got border controls there we've got to be aware of, that I can't accept a script in WA because it offends the laws here, but I can have the same script in Queensland or New South Wales. No one bats an eye. So we've got here stupidity. And this is because the states themselves have made their own laws, and some of them are quite stupid. WA in particular is very conservative, very backward. So what we're looking at here is, can we get any federal support? Can we get any federal unity? Can we work together? And this is one thing here, which as a report now is in the documents that are available to all the parliaments and can be referenced. So I've given a copy of this report to my colleagues in New South Wales and Victoria, and also the ones upcoming in Queensland and all over Australia, because this is something which now must feature at every parliamentary discussion. I take Fiona Patton's report about the recreational cannabis. I can quote that now in Parliament as an official parliamentary report. Yes, the government in Victoria watered it down. Yes, they didn't accept all the recommendations, but it's nothing that we can't present in Western Australia saying this is what the Parliament of Victoria has suggested. Let's do it. And of course, if I can get McGowan to say I can beat Dan Andrews, maybe he'll take up the challenge. I don't know. But what we have here is a bureaucratic, boring document with a lot of excellent recommendations. List one, for example: the Department of Primary Industry and Regional Development conduct a review of the Industrial Hemp Act 2004 to ensure the legislation is fit for purpose and does not impose unjustified restrictions on the industry, taking into account the limited opportunity for industrial hemp to be misused or redirected. Is anyone asleep yet? Now, the beauty of this is that what we're looking at here is, if we're concerned about THC, then we're going to stop access to industrial hemp. We can't feed it to cows because they might have THC and we might get high from eating a steak. Yeah, people think this. So my question is, how many cows do you have to eat to get one high? I mean, we're talking physical numbers of cows, not kilograms of meat. And you're putting this across and you're saying that really is really stupid. And then they say, but when we export the beef, the other people got regulations there too. The world is changing, this will change. And the more we at Parliament can bring out the facts and say what really is going on, the more other countries can actually keep up with us, or we can keep up with them. For example, Thailand. Why don't we in Western Australia follow the Thai suggestions? Why don't we in Australia at a federal level talk about this, for example, in the PBS? Because one of the things we had here was the question about the affordability. And one of the areas where affordability is difficult is because we, up until now, weren't allowed to compound our medications. You get it from the companies, but now after this report, it's now been relaxed. So now I am able in my pharmacy there to compound medication at a reduced price and make it measured to fit the patient, not what's just available on the shelf. This is a step forward, isn't it? So cheaper, we're making gummies now actually, and wafers and troches, and we're thinking about a nasal spray, which would be absolutely awesome. And the research is going on, we're having a fantastic time. But the limits that the government is imposing upon us are things that we can at parliamentary level address, and it's by doing the hard parliamentary work of working through this and similar committees that we actually get changes there. And of course everything else that happens, the questions we ask, the statements we make, and the responses. Maybe next year I'll talk to you about the economic challenge I'm giving McGowan in a few weeks' time. Just still embargoed, so don't mention that, please. It's going to make him cry, I hope. Now, how else could we support the development of cannabis as a medicine? How else can we reduce the costs? These are things which we looked at as well. And for example, there's one here where the Western Australian government encourage and support research into medicinal cannabis in our higher education, health and industry sectors to drive advances, improve the evidence base and facilitate patient access. We're building the grounds here for educating the educators, for introducing knowledge about endocannabinoid system into university to teach the doctors that they can prescribe cannabis with safety. That's I have to do that. What about in the higher education, health and industry? What about the industry sector? They're looking at how better can we cultivate cannabis for specific reasons. Now, the example that I gave earlier in Israel is that they're actually identifying the individual cannabinoids, the individual terpenes, putting together a mixture, and then trying out on individual patients with individual diseases what works best, what terpenes work best. We had this lovely discussion with Mark Webb yesterday about the aromatics and the terpenes in actually affecting health. They all have a powerful effect. How can we introduce that to get a better effect? The idea behind this is that rather than growing cannabis in your backyard, which is no problem with that, let's organise that. We're working towards that. Our bill's coming out hopefully later this year. But growing it yourself doesn't really compare with the medicinal approach. Now, you could say that everyone who's taking cannabis now is using it medicinally because they're treating something or other. Okay? But in the pure medicinal side here, if we've got, say, multiple sclerosis, how do we know which particular components of that are needed for this particular illness? So it's going to be different from treating cancer, different from treating, say, autism in a 5-year-old. So we need to be very aware of that. And this is what this is saying here. We need to encourage education, health and industry sectors to drive these advances in really boring language, but what it means is we're hoping to, if the government approves, to free up cannabis for more research so we can actually normalise that and incorporate that into our vast amount of potential for medicinal cannabis, and that leads on to a vast amount of potential for freeing up cannabis as a healthy, healing herb. We did speak about hemp to some degree as well, but that really didn't feature so much because it wasn't quite as sexy. The medicinal side here really turned them on, and the barriers to that, and the cost being a major barrier. And so what they recommended is, in conjunction with peak medical bodies, investigate the feasibility of a medicinal cannabis advisory service, and if feasible, establish a medicinal cannabis advisory service. So we're hoping to get then top-class people who know about this to actually take it out of the realms of the amateur doctors who are prescribing because they don't know about it, and making it something which is sensible, highly developed, advanced. Now, they're doing this actually in Germany. In Germany, they've got a fantastic system there where all doctors are allowed to prescribe cannabis, and they need to actually, well, they're allowed to give details as to what's happened, how has it helped this patient, what's the problems with this patient. And all of this is going into a database. The Germans are very, very organised. That database is now at governmental level, and they have, once they're legalising cannabis, and they plan to do that, they've also got a pharmacy. It's a huge organisation there, the only government-owned pharmacy in Europe, I think. And that takes all of the cannabis, either the homegrown or the imported cannabis, and distributes it. It distributes it for medicinal use and also for recreational use. So now we're getting government-approved cannabis for recreational use. Clean, without the chemicals, without the additives which we don't really want to have from the backyard growers who are just making a profit. And that is something that is being done at that level in Europe. And what they're asking for here is, shall we begin that process of looking at cannabis more professionally? The West Australian government conduct a cost-benefit analysis of implementing a compassionate access scheme for medicinal cannabis products. We haven't got PBS yet, but what we can do is get a compassionate access scheme and formalise that, and implement a compassionate access scheme. This is what we're looking at here with the government funds. Can we actually offer cannabis at a cheaper price for people who need it deeply but can't afford it? These are the advantages that we've got with the select committee of being able to put out where are the problems. There's so much more we could have talked about, but 18 months I think for a fairly limited report. Is there room for more? There is. Will we get it? Probably not, because in the coming year I'm going to make myself a bit of a bastard in Parliament and be confronting McGowan with the economic benefits of cannabis legalisation, and he's going to hate that. But that's where I'm at just now, trying to create a scene whereby it is so blindingly obvious that cannabis needs to be legalised that no one can stand against it. That will happen, maybe not in this Parliament. I'm expecting it in the next Parliament. Another area which really I think we should be pointing out is the use of the safety of cannabis in our FIFO mines, because Western Australia is a major mining centre, but also elsewhere in Australia. And they have got pretty stupid regulations. So the recommendation here is that the Department of Mines, Industry Regulation and Safety review its publication. Basically what they're saying is the publication is crap. Alcohol and other drugs in the workplace guidance note, with a view to developing and publishing a more comprehensive and contemporary guidance. So write it better. And the reason behind this is because what we have is the idea that we need workplace safety, so 0 accidents, 0 deaths. Perfectly good idea. And drug place should be free of impairment. I think no one could argue with that. But how are you doing it? How about if, what they've done in Western Australia is they've taken THC as a urine test, not even a swab test, a urine test. So if you've smoked cannabis 2 weeks prior, you're probably going to have positive metabolites in your urine. Therefore you're impaired, therefore we'll strike you off, and you'll never get a job in the FIFO again. This is major stuff. Lose your house, lose your family.
Go on to meth instead.
Which is what they've done. They've gone on to methamphetamine in large numbers. We're in a major meth consuming state now, because you can go off your head for the 2 weeks you're off and then go back to work utterly shagged out and unable to work because you're impaired, which they're not testing for. Then accidents happen and deaths will happen. And so what I am putting out here is the concept here of we in the Legalised Cannabis Party are for regulation, for workplace impairment testing, for safety at work, for OSH regulations. Can you imagine the underground here, the cannabis users, we're actually standing up and saying we want regulation, we want actually good OSH regulation? How boringly bureaucratic of us. Okay? Here we are being actual politicians doing a political job for the wellness of the people we claim to represent. And this is actually something where we as politicians now in Parliament, legalised cannabis politicians in 3 states now, can stand up and say we represent good laws, we represent good regulation. We are now, I hate to say it, establishment. We are the enemy. That's where we're at. So anyhow, I could bore you for hours on this, but do you have any questions about the idea of the Select Committee, the report itself, or politicians in place?
Do you think the government's going to go for regulations where you actually can have some THC when you're driving?
Regulations, will the government go for it? I think yes. It's inevitable. The question really is, how do you test for impairment? And this occupied us for some considerable time. Now, the Commissioner for Police appeared in front of the committee. Isn't it strange that I, as a cannabis user, can actually interrogate and demand an answer from the Commissioner of Police? He's got to stand and sit there and answer truthfully, and I can then ask return questions. I can bring him back in again if I want to say, you didn't tell the truth, did you? And actually he can be sanctioned for that. So of course they behave themselves when they come in front of a parliamentary committee. It's actually quite a powerful thing. But what he was saying, he actually realised that the first time I spoke to him was actually in a budget, it was a question about the budget, and he had to give chapter and verse answers. And I ran him in circles, and I got him to admit that they don't actually test for impairment. And it doesn't make a difference, we'll ping you because cannabis is present and you must be impaired, although you're not. So it was quite embarrassing for him, but I had a lot of fun. So he came before me again in front of the committee, and he knew what was coming on him. And he was actually very, very good. He said, listen, we are against anything which impairs driving. And we as a committee said, and we 100% agree with that, no one should drive when they're impaired. Tell me about alcohol in 0.05, which is actually the level at which you have double the number of accidents. And this is allowed. So we have actually an inconsistency. And that what he then admitted to saying is, listen, if the government says that you're okay driving with THC, we will follow that. But if they have said, this is that law that the government should change, if they have stated that this is a prescribed illicit drug and that the zero presence is the only tolerable result, then we will follow that too. And that's fair enough. And I don't think any of the police really agree with that, but that's what the job is. They've got to do what the government says. If the government's an ass, then they're going to behave like asses. So that is our job in Parliament, and this is clear. The committee has made this very clear. It's wrong. We must change that. And that's gone to the Premier and the Cabinet, and the Cabinet knows that because they also know what I do when they give the wrong answers. I put it out on social media. The government knows it's actually killing people or harming people or doing the wrong thing, and they refuse to change it. And here's the report which says they should do that, and they're not. And they know what's going to come on them, so they would be very stupid not to make that change. And I sincerely believe they've been crafting that law since that 2021 report from Alana McTiernan. So if they've been sensible, they've done that. If not, they'll wait until this. If they haven't, if they refuse to do that, if they're not going to take any part of that, then I will be going after them. But within 2 months, they've got to give an answer to this. They must. This is the power of this. I've put out a report here under my name. This is my report. And you, government, Premier and Cabinet, you are required to give your report within a maximum of 2 months. They must. And that report will be telling me what I do next. And I fully anticipate they're going to be making some concessions. So yes, the answer to your question, I fully expect they will. We have a deeper question though that we haven't answered and the government doesn't know, is how do you test for the presence of THC at which level you are impaired? And the answer is, I think you can't. Because if you've never taken THC and you take a 10-10 mixture of 1 ml of that, you will be impaired. Okay? You'll drive slower, you have to think, you'll be a bit slower. Ask me how I know. But if you've been using a lot of cannabis, a lot of THC, and you've just taken, say, you've smoked a whole joint 2 hours before, are you actually impaired? How do you test for that? And there is an interesting idea. One of my friends was a candidate for the lower house in New South Wales, got 13% actually, really good going. He was suggesting, what about if we managed to create a kind of a head-up screen you could put in the car, there's your steering wheel, there's your pedals, we'll put the program on here, play for with a minute, and let's test how you're steering, let's test how your swerve correction is taking place, which is a fine example of are you impaired or not. Could we do that? Yes, we could. Should we? Absolutely we should. Take a few minutes to do. So if the police notice that you're actually not quite keeping in your lane quite well, let's stop you and see if you're impaired. If you're impaired with THC on board, or if you're sleep deprived, sleep apnea for example, and you haven't used your machine, or you've had alcohol the night before and a poor quality sleep, are you impaired? You may be within the limits, but you're impaired because we've tested you on roadside conditions. That would be a brilliant thing. That absolutely would be interesting. Hasn't been developed yet. Could it be developed? I hope so. But the word is going out. We're asking for that. There are other things we could use, but they're not quite as good. So the definitive impairment test needs to be found. They have got tests in the US for measuring your THC levels on your breath, like a breathalyzer. But that does not correlate with impairment. So if we make up a thing 0.05, only double the number of accidents, we could probably do the same for THC as well. But I don't like the idea that at 0.049 you could be driving along, my wife and children coming the other way, you're going to put her at risk because you've got double the chance of having an accident. Am I cool with that? No. No. Other questions? Medicinal cannabis, you can get two types of CBD. One is the isolate CBD, which has no THC whatsoever. And it is effective, but not much. When it is effective, it's very effective, and it's certainly very safe to use. I tend to use more of a full spectrum, which has got CBG and other cannabinoids, which can metabolize into a low level of THC, which can be tested positive in urine, especially in FIFO. Tongue testing, not so much, but I find that much more effective. So high CBD is an interesting area, but interesting. When I was touring through Germany and Israel, they were all saying, well, you're giving too little THC. They're far more interested in increasing the THC. So they're comfortable with that. I think what we need is more experience to see what does work for which people. So there are going to be differences, I think, of opinion. But yes, the CBD isolate on its own is effective, not for all of the cases, but for certainly some. It's worth a try at the beginning, see how it works. Very safe and can be effective.
I drive with my landlord, my black belt. Would that be the wise thing to do? My TGA approved letter?
If you're driving with the approval from the TGA, or indeed just a proof of a script, that will tell the police officer that you are driving with medicinal cannabis. Now, with medicinal cannabis, the levels of THC are very different. If you, for example, smoke a joint, you've got between 150 to 250 milligrams of THC. Medicinal cannabis is something up between 0 and 40 milligrams of THC on average. Maybe 20 to 30 would be more classical. And so you're not going to be impaired, at least to the degree, if you're naive in THC, as you would if you'd taken a joint. So the police officer might, if they're good-hearted, good police officers, good community people, they may say, oh, okay, fine, off you go. Especially if they see no impairment.
But they won't.
But they won't. Well, in New South Wales, they're particularly harsh, I believe. You're positive, you're positive. In WA, I had cases where police officers said, no, off you go, this is not worth the paperwork. On the other hand, there are police officers who say, yeah, you're fucking nicked. Okay? And they take pleasure in that. Now, you could then go in front of a magistrate. With a good lawyer, you'll get off. Okay? If you haven't got a lawyer, you haven't got the money for that, and you've got a bad magistrate, you get the book thrown at you. So even if you've got medical papers there, this is the whole point about this report here. Once we get the medical defence proven in law by the Parliament, then yes, your letter is absolutely going to be clear. Even if, and I hate to say this in public, if you have got your script and it's too expensive, you're growing it in your backyard and using it, if you've got the evidence there you're a medicinal cannabis user, that'll count. I didn't say that. Yeah. Okay, we're good in that case. Nice and quick.
Just a comment. I find it interesting that the police, I've been sprinkling this throughout the couple of days, I find it interesting that the police are only really concerned about people that eat cookies, smoke or vape or have a tincture on their tongue. Something that touches the tongue. Yeah. But the police do acknowledge that if you take a capsule, like a pill with the liquid in it, it doesn't touch the tongue, and so therefore you will actually be tested clear and negative and safe to drive. So the police themselves in court prosecutions have acknowledged that it's okay to drive with that tablet because we can't detect it. It's only if you eat or touch it. Yeah.
That is beautiful and very, very true.
And that's been tested research-wise.
Yes. No, the capsule is actually a great idea for that. I sometimes say, listen, if you just put a few drops into the peanut butter and swallow that, that should be okay as well. And also wash your tongue with a Biotin mouth spray. It tends to clear that. But the capsule absolutely is a good way of doing that. But interestingly, what you mentioned out there is that it doesn't really matter how much you got on board. If you can't test it, you're fine.
Exactly right. And
how likely is the capsule to leak?
Well, can I elaborate briefly on that? So I know this is first-hand research, not hearsay. If you smoke a joint, you're getting maybe 30 to 60 milligrams, and the rest 60 milligrams just goes in the air, so it's a waste, right? If you take a capsule, you're getting all of it. And so I know firsthand, if you take 20 milligrams up to 120 milligrams, why would you do 120 milligrams? To prove the point that you'll be unconscious on the bed. And when you wake up 5 hours later, you're totally buzzing, there's no way you would drive or let alone walk, but you can test your tongue, and if you haven't got gingivitis or blood, if you haven't got reflux or vomit, you will be clear. So as long as your capsule itself is made properly and it doesn't have residue all over it, I say put your mouth with water immediately swallow it and make sure that nothing, you'll be fine. And I don't want you to believe me on this. I would rather you go out and buy the THC saliva swabs. They only cost $10, and they test right down to 12 nanograms.
Not 5, I thought it was 5.
12 nanograms is the best I could find. The police first swab tested around 10 nanograms. We're splitting a molecule.
Awesome stuff. Thank you for that.
Is that milligrams per milliliter blood? Is that equals alcohol or something?
Sorry?
Is that equals 0.5 milligrams per gram of blood? Is that how it works?
No, they're just testing for a molecular amount of 10 nanograms. It's a molecule.
Yeah, the test has no measure whatsoever of impairment. Alcohol 0.05 is double the number of accidents. THC, any presence, doesn't give any idea about the impairment level. You could have actually quite a lot of THC in your system. You may not be unimpaired, absolutely. So it's a question here of function, not presence.
So put the THC, because I'm on THC oil at night.
Right, buy yourself the capsules.
And just
They
put it
cost
in.
$10.
But I'm also on flour, which I make.
Well,
from
that's your own
which
risk.
is different, that's
I can
right. But
enter
at least I know the oil, I can stick it in the capsule.
Well, they've done studies as to how much time needs to pass before you test negative, and it can be up to 12 hours. But usually 4 hours loss of, you won't be impaired anymore. 8 hours detection is probably going to be negative then, but 12 hours for it to be safe.
Do they have in Western Australia the honest and reasonable mistake of fact defence? Because you don't have that in Queensland.
No, we don't. Presence is presence.
But in Western Australia, are they testing as much? Or are they only going to really test you if they...
I have only ever been tested in Nimbin.
Yeah, because I don't think they're testing as much in Western Australia, unless they suspect.
Of 3,000 patients I've prescribed for, only 2 have been tested and found positive. And that's been critical. I've got a number of people who've approached me as a politician saying I have been tested and found positive and I'm in court. There's not that many, but it's still enough to be troublesome. But our police, I mean, if you're dreadlocked and driving in Rockingham running donuts, you'll get tested. But for most people, not. The RVTs there, I've yet to find one with a drug testing.
Because I mean, I've been using for a long time and I've never once been blue over it. I actually don't stress over it.
Queensland policy technically is they do both tests.
Really, yeah. I can't stress over it.
Well, we're very fortunate there, but WA is turning into a police state. I am very concerned by that and speaking out against that. So I fully anticipate that if the police can get more powers, they will take them. And McGowan, I'm afraid, is actually on board with that. He's got a police minister who is it's basically a fascist. And he is lying to the public, lying to Parliament, getting away with it. I'll be bringing some of his features to the public eye.
Is that expensive, those tests?
The tests, I don't know what they cost actually. I had the idea that it's about $75 per test, something like that. But I'm not aware of the actual cost because I've asked the question and they said we have no figures for that.
Brian, have you ever raised in Parliament the Lambert study on the Dragot test saying that they were inaccurate by 30 to 50%? And what's their response?
Yes, I have actually. Not actually. It might have been a question, and they said we are. They said the test conformed to standard, something like that, so they wouldn't acknowledge the experience. I also mentioned that at the budgetary question time of the police themselves, and they were unable to give an answer for that. They simply repeated parroted the reply that the tests are performing according to specifications, and that there's no concerns for any errors. Police state.
And yet you point out the error in your question.
They're very good at sidestepping that by rephrasing it. So this is what my social media is pointing out, and people are commenting on that. But yes, they are hiding the truth, and they are. This is one reason why I got the committee, is because they didn't want so many questions. Now, if the committee's finished, I can ask more questions. But it's true. There are plenty of areas where they are less than frank, and where the repeated questions is opening them up to the fact that they've hidden the actual facts. And this report here goes some way to addressing some of those in official form, bureaucratic form, boring but effective.
Have you done a non-boring media release about that boring?
No, what happened is that on the day that this was released, I got ABC picked it up, Southwest. No one else. In Western Australia, the narrative is controlled by the government. Kerry Stokes is a friend of the Premier, and one of my staffers is actually an ex-Channel 7. That's why the graphics are so good. And he has got friends who are still in the business. And he called them and said, "Why is no one picking up?" And the reply came back from several. "We've been told to do less stories on cannabis." So what we're being blanked. When there's one reporter who's in the West Australian is very friendly, very open, very good, happy to. When she writes the report, she's always stabbing me in the back. So I give the information, and she twists it into a backstab. And I look at that, yeah, interesting. There's another guy there, Joe Spagnolo, who's actually giving an honest report, but the headlines are written by someone else. And so that gives a spin to the report, which makes me, they try and make me look like a druggie, not to be taken seriously. But they can't really do that much, and so they've been quite quiet. They don't want any reports coming out. However, this one here came out, and for the first time, it's actually a sensible report. When it's the government has replied, I'll be putting it out again. And one of my tasks this year is to actually get more into the media, not on cannabis, but on other projects. For example, local government reform, the boring stuff, where I can put an opinion out there, and people say, well, actually, he's not a dopehead. He's actually got some sensible points, and then I can take a position in society as someone who's actually got a point of view that's not government and not official opposition. Well, we haven't got much opposition, but someone who's got a reasonable point of view out there. And once that happens, then I can segue back into the cannabis, not as we must free cannabis, but we must look at, say, OSH regulations, we must look at driving regulations, we must look at keeping our workers safe, keeping our children safe, this kind of stuff. So we're looking here at how do we approach this from different areas which attract people's attention as concerned parents, as concerned educators, as concerned employers. Boring, but effective.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.
There's only about 10 West Australians here.
You know, I must admit, this is just on a slightly diversion here, but I read somewhere that Western Australia has the most severe drug laws, in that if you're caught selling a small amount of even cannabis, they can seize your assets, your home, your property. That to me sounds shockingly terrible.
It's scary.
The Wayne Martin report came out 4 years ago, and it recommended that the Misuse of Drugs Act ought to be completely rewritten. There were 64 or 69 recommendations, none of them have been acted on. The Attorney General, I'm actually working with him, and he would like to change that, but Cabinet is against that. So I've actually got him on side because I can now speak out, and he's going to just smile and say, well, I can't say anything here, and let the Cabinet members take the flak, and I will be addressing that. But yes, if the police find that you've got a certain amount of plant, a certain weight of plant, they can declare you a trafficker. Now what's then happened, the laws currently state that if the prosecutor declares you a drug trafficker, the magistrate or the judge is obliged, mandatory treatment as a drug trafficker, which then involves the Criminal Confiscation Act, which allows them to take your home and any other assets used for drug trade. There was this man, Vietnamese, who was trafficking in cannabis. His mother owned the house, and she wasn't involved at all, and her house was going to be taken off her because her son had used that house. So that was that blew up. That's horrendous. It blew up in the public. They can't possibly do this. Another case is just recently out there about a house in a very valuable area in the leafy suburbs of Perth. 10 years later, the house has now been confiscated because it was part of a drug process. The son, I think, was doing that. But what we've got there is several $1 million worth of land, and they're going to knock the house down and rebuild very valuable property on that.
Sorry, question. When you said that the gentleman, well, just got his possessions taken off him.
Yeah, the house was confiscated.
The one after that.
Oh no, that's the same thing here. The house has now been taken and is being sold, multi-million dollars.
Oh, so, and pretense, sorry about that. So, like in the pretense of a stolen car, if I bought a car that was stolen somewhere previously in history, and it comes up, not that it's a stolen car, but if you bought a car, you think it's legitimate, and it's been done in the process of crime, or in there of it was stolen, or drugs, or in that whole thing, if that person buys a property, and the drug part was that?
No, that's if you.
Some previous drug.
If they bought a car and it's actually been stolen, for example, you have to hand it back to the owner. But in this particular case, it's taken off now and it's now owned by the council, and that is now council land, and they can sell that for quite a few $1 million. Well, yes, indeed, and sometimes the police say yes. There's one case a little while back where they said this woman comes to see her husband who's got a drug grow in his home, and she's living down. She's separated or a divorce, and she's living down the road there in a beach property. And the police are saying, you're related in that case. They can now confiscate her house as well, and they said it'll go into the police funds. Yes, they profit from this. But the point about this is that the Wayne Martin report has been neglected, and their intent is to ignore it. I'm putting in a modification to that, and it's causing some difficulty for the government because this is reported. Wayne Martin is an eminent legal capacity, and so this is actually just it's outrageous. So I'll be making a point of this and making some changes to that, but this Parliament, unlikely. The next Parliament with more balance of power, we can do that and force them to make the changes that they promised they would. The Attorney General had been working on this, but it's been stymied by his cabinet colleagues, I would think. So yes, these are areas where, as an elected Member of Parliament, for the Legalised Cannabis Party, we can actually cause quite severe pain when we have more of a balance of power. At the moment, just being a good boy and being kind of just pointing out things. But once there's a balance of power, I can then say, right, if you don't do this, you're not going to get this, what are you going to give me? These are the things I want. Next Parliament.
Sorry, just one quick one, sorry. You say balance of power. What other, like Greens or anything would help to get it across in WA?
At the moment, the Greens probably would. The next Parliament, the Assembly is going to be the same laws. They're redoing some of the boundaries, but it won't be that much of a difference. The Libs will have a problem getting back in power. The Liberals, the Nats, the Liberals are flagging. They're really having a hard time. And so they might find themselves shut out of Parliament, but they're probably going to be making another combined party to represent the Liberals the way they used to be and try and catch their heels back again. But that's another matter. Upper House is now a single state. McGowan wanted to keep the minor parties out, so he changed the laws, which he said he wasn't, but he did. Now we're very fortunate. We're no longer a micro party, we're a minor party, and we're an up-and-coming minor party, and there's every chance we're going to get re-elected. The question is how many of us will be re-elected. By the same token, the Greens, they had 4 in the last Parliament, they've got 1 now. So they could get 2, 3, maybe 4 in the next Parliament. We're sadly, with the new laws, going to get maybe One Nation coming in as well. That's inevitable. And God forbid, maybe even the WA party, because we need Nazis to have a balance of power. But the end result is going to be that the Labour Party numbers are going to go down. I don't know about how much. McGowan is losing favour slowly because people are seeing this. The Libs are going to do their best to actually increase their power again, just maybe get a few more seats. But I think the smaller parties are going to have more of a say. That's right, so we're going to get more of the smaller parties coming in, and that means it's more exciting, because at the moment we've got a crossbench of only 5 at the moment, and if we can get to 10 or 15, that would be awesome.